Warning disclaimer: the following story is a work of fiction, intended for entertainment purposes only. It explores mature emotional themes involving temptation, boundaries, and consequences. All characters, names, and situations are purely imaginary. This story is not based on real individuals or events. Viewer discretion is advised. The content is designed for audiences aged 18 and above. It was one of those slow, humid afternoons in late July when the world outside seemed to melt under the weight of the sun. Claire had the entire house to herself, a rare kind of peace she hadn't felt in a while. Her husband, Mark, was away on a 3-day business trip in Chicago, and the silence in the house felt oddly comforting. With the air conditioner humming and a tall glass of iced tea on the side table, Claire curled up on the couch wearing nothing but her thin white robe, soft and slightly loose, her damp hair wrapped in a towel after a long, luxurious shower. She wasn't trying to look seductive. She was simply at ease, unguarded, relaxed, and without pretense. The television was on low volume, playing one of those daytime cooking shows she half-watched while scrolling through her phone. Her feet rested on the edge of the couch, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't in a rush. No meetings, no chores, no obligations, just stillness. That's when it happened. A soft but distinct knock on the front door. Startled, Claire sat up, instinctively clutching her robe tighter around her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her neighbors usually texted first before coming over. Maybe it was a package? A delivery? Still slightly damp from her shower, she walked toward the door with hesitant steps, adjusting her robe's tie just enough to feel decently covered. Another knock came, firmer this time. When she opened the door, the sunlight poured in so brightly that it took her a second to fully see who was standing there. And then her heart skipped a beat. There, in a slightly wrinkled gray t-shirt and dark jeans, stood Ethan, her neighbor's 20-year-old son. His brown hair was a little messy, and sweat clung to his forehead, likely from helping his mom clean out their garage, something she'd seen him doing earlier that morning. He looked surprised too, maybe more than she was. His eyes widened for a brief moment as he took in the sight of Claire, standing in the doorway in her robe, cheeks flushed, collarbone glistening faintly from the leftover heat of the shower. "Hi! Sorry," he stammered, clearing his throat awkwardly. "My mom asked if you had some extra disinfectant spray. Ours ran out." Claire blinked, still slightly thrown off by the sudden intrusion into her bubble of peace. "Oh, yeah. Sure, hold on," she said quickly, stepping slightly behind the door to shield herself better. She tried to shake the awkwardness, but even as she turned toward the hallway closet, she felt it. The strange awareness of being seen in a vulnerable, intimate state by someone who wasn't supposed to notice. A simple knock had cracked open a quiet afternoon and let in, so Claire handed Ethan the disinfectant spray with a polite smile, doing her best to ignore the tension she suddenly felt in the space between them. "Here you go," she said, her voice casual, though her fingers brushed his for the briefest second as he took the bottle. That one touch, fleeting as it was, sent a surprising jolt through her chest. Not out of attraction, she told herself, but because of the strangeness of it all. Ethan had grown up next door. She remembered when he was just a shy kid on a skateboard, chasing after the ice cream truck. And now here he was, taller, broader, no longer a boy but not quite a man either. Something about his posture and the way he looked at her made Claire feel suddenly aware of herself in a way she hadn't in years. He didn't leave right away. Instead, Ethan lingered, holding the bottle of spray awkwardly in his hand. "Thanks, Mrs. Lancaster," he said, then corrected himself quickly. "I mean Claire." His smile was hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was overstepping. Claire laughed lightly, brushing a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "Claire is fine," she replied. "I think we're past the age of Mrs. anything." Ethan laughed too, but there was something in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe? Or confusion. He looked at her like he was seeing her differently now, not just as the neighbor's wife, but as someone separate from that role. And Claire, whether she admitted it to herself or not, noticed that look. The conversation stretched out longer than expected. They chatted about the heat, the mess in his mom's garage, the college courses he'd be taking in the fall. Claire leaned lightly against the doorframe, crossing her arms in front of her chest, doing her best to stay casual. But something about Ethan's presence unsettled her. Not in a dangerous way, but in a way that made her feel exposed, as if her robe wasn't enough, as if the air had changed. She noticed how his eyes occasionally flicked downward, only to quickly look away. He wasn't being inappropriate. In fact, he seemed almost nervous, maybe even guilty for glancing. But Claire saw it, felt it, and what surprised her wasn't his reaction. It was her own. She wasn't offended. She wasn't angry. She was flattered. It had been a long time since someone looked at her like that, not with obligation or familiarity, but with raw, unfiltered curiosity. Her husband loved her, of course, but marriage had a way of settling into routine. Ethan, however, reminded her, unintentionally, that she was still visible, still a woman. The moment couldn't last. Claire smiled politely, gently nudging the door as if to close the conversation. "Tell your mom I said hi," she said. Ethan nodded, stepping back down the porch. "Thanks again," he said over his shoulder, before jogging across the lawn and disappearing into the side door of his house. Claire closed the door softly behind her, her heart stilling but her mind suddenly spinning. Meeting unexpected, something she couldn't quite name yet. Claire paced slowly back to the kitchen after closing the door, still holding her iced tea, though the ice had melted into watery sweetness. She sipped it absent-mindedly, her mind drifting to the way Ethan had looked at her. Not with boldness, but with a hesitancy that somehow made it feel more real. She chastised herself for even noticing. "He's just a kid," she thought. "You're married, and you're reading into nothing." But the way her pulse quickened told her otherwise. Later that evening, just before dinner, there was another knock at the door. Claire hesitated before answering. Her robe had been replaced with casual loungewear. Still modest, though her shoulders were bare. She opened the door to find Ethan once again, holding a small Ziploc bag of cookies. "My mom made these, said to share some with you." Claire laughed, genuine this time. "How thoughtful. She makes amazing cookies. She said you like the ones with dark chocolate?" Ethan said, and then smiled. That same boyish, uncertain smile that now seemed different from before. Claire invited him in, and they stood near the kitchen island, munching on cookies and sipping lemonade. The conversation drifted to safe topics: school, family, the upcoming heat wave. But underneath the casual exchange was a growing tension. Not dangerous, not aggressive, just thick, almost magnetic. Claire noticed that Ethan always looked her in the eyes when he spoke, except when her shoulders shifted or when she tucked her hair behind her ear. Then he'd look away, quickly, respectfully, but not before she caught the glance. She asked him about college, about his plans, and he answered with the kind of energy that reminded her what it felt like to be young and unsure of your place in the world. He made her laugh. He made her remember. She told herself it was innocent. It was just conversation. She was a grown woman, married, just being friendly. But why, then, did she feel that flutter in her stomach when he leaned in to show her a picture on his phone? Why did her skin warm when his arm brushed hers by accident? At one point, Claire excused herself to the bathroom and paused to look at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was flushed, her eyes brighter than usual. Was this loneliness showing itself in disguise? Or was it boredom? Was she really tempted by a neighbor's son, someone who'd once ridden his bike around her driveway? When she came back, Ethan was standing near the door, preparing to leave. "Thanks again," he said, his voice low, as though unsure whether to say more. He didn't. He just nodded, smiled again, and left. Claire stood by the door a moment longer after he'd gone. The evening air slipped through the screen, but her skin was already warm. Whatever this was, it had started. Not with a kiss, not with words, but with a glance, a laugh, and a cookie shared in silence. The following afternoon, Claire busied herself with tasks she had put off for weeks. Reorganizing kitchen drawers, refolding linens, and cleaning out the pantry. It wasn't that these things couldn't wait. It was more that her thoughts refused to settle, and she needed the distraction. Every time her mind wandered, it landed back on Ethan. His smile, his quiet eyes, his awkward glances, and the way he'd stood so close yesterday without actually crossing any line. But it felt like a line had already been crossed. Not with touch, with energy. Late in the day, as Claire was hauling a box of old glassware down from the upper shelf in the hallway closet, her grip slipped. The box teetered and nearly fell. Just as she tried to catch it, she heard a knock at the back door. The sudden sound startled her, and the box crashed to the floor with a loud clatter, glass shattering across the tiles. "Damn it!" she muttered, crouching down as carefully as she could. The door creaked open just a second later, and Ethan peeked in from the side yard. "Claire? I heard something. Are you okay?" She looked up from the floor, caught in the moment, surrounded by broken glass, heart pounding, and him standing in the doorway like he had been summoned by her nerves. "Yeah," she said, breathing out a soft laugh. "Just a box of old glasses. One slipped. I'll help you clean it up," Ethan offered, stepping inside before she could object. He was wearing a sleeveless gray shirt, the kind that showed the tone definition of his arms and shoulders, and Claire found herself staring a second too long before snapping back into motion. "No, it's fine, I don't mind," he said. Already grabbing the broom and dustpan hanging from the nearby utility hook, they knelt down together, slowly sweeping up the shards. The space between them was tight, their arms brushing now and then as they worked. Each accidental contact sent a shiver through Claire's spine. She tried not to notice, but her body was already reacting. Not in control, not asking for permission. Then it happened. Ethan reached across her to grab a small glass fragment under the cabinet, and their hands met, palm to palm, for a heartbeat too long. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Claire's breath hitched as she looked up at him. His eyes were steady this time, not darting away like before. The air between them felt charged, thick with something unspoken, something electric. She should have pulled away, should have laughed it off, but she didn't. She just stared. It was Ethan who moved first. He pulled his hand back gently, breaking the connection, and stood. "I think that's the last of it," he said softly. Claire remained kneeling for a second longer, grounding herself, trying to slow the rhythm of her heart. She nodded without looking at him. "Yeah, thanks." He left through the back door, quieter than before. But Claire knew something had shifted. Not with words, not with touch, but with the silence that followed it. And she wasn't sure if she wanted to stop it. That night, Claire sat curled up on the far end of her living room couch, a throw blanket draped over her legs, the television casting faint light across the room. Some late-night drama was playing, full of affairs and betrayals, a bit too on the nose. But Claire wasn't watching it. Her mind was far away, stuck in that tiny moment earlier when her hand had lingered against Ethan's. It was a second, maybe less, but it had burned itself into her memory like a scar she wasn't sure she wanted to heal. She hadn't done anything wrong, technically. Nothing happened. No kiss. No touch that meant anything. But still, there was a gnawing guilt that clung to her ribs like a weight she couldn't shake. It wasn't just that she was married. It was the fact that something in her wanted to replay that moment. That she kept feeling that subtle electric hum in her chest whenever she closed her eyes. When her phone buzzed, she flinched. It was a message from her husband. "Miss you. Long day. Call you in the morning?" Red heart. Claire stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Of course. Love you." She placed the phone down gently and sat there in the dim room, lit only by a flickering screen and the quiet rustling of her conscience. She thought about Mark, about how stable he was, how kind, how hardworking. He wasn't passionate in the way he used to be, but he was loyal, dependable, and loving. And here she was, sitting alone in the house they built together, thinking about the boy who lived next door. Claire got up to pour herself a glass of wine, something to still the noise in her chest. As she walked into the kitchen, she passed by the side window and instinctively glanced outside, and there he was. Ethan stood near his driveway, holding a bag of trash he was likely taking out, but for a second, He paused and looked directly toward her house. Toward her window. Their eyes met. It wasn't bold. It wasn't even intentional, perhaps. But it was there. Claire froze, wine glass in hand, halfway to the counter. Ethan didn't move. He didn't wave. Just held her gaze for a second or two, then turned and disappeared around the side of his house into the shadows. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow. She hated how alive she felt in that moment. She hated that she wanted to know if he'd look again. She hated that no matter how much she tried to reason with herself, her body had betrayed her already, not by acting, but by reacting. She closed the blinds slowly and turned off the kitchen light. The silence in the house no longer felt peaceful, felt dangerous, like the calm before something irreversible. That night, Claire lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the ceiling fan swirling above her. She didn't sleep easily. She dreamed in glances, in guilt, in almost. The next morning began quietly, but Claire couldn't shake the weight of the night before. She busied herself with meaningless chores, folding laundry she'd already folded, reorganizing the spice rack, wiping down the already clean countertops. She moved like someone trying to scrub guilt off her skin. Every creak in the house made her glance toward the door or window, and she hated that part of her was waiting for another knock. By early afternoon it came. This time it was the front door. She stood still for a moment, her heart thudding as if warning her. She hadn't heard his voice or seen him yet, but she knew. It was him. She didn't ask why she knew. She just did. She took a breath and opened the door. And there he was, again. Ethan. This time in a faded black t-shirt, jeans, and holding something in his hand. A small toolbox. "Hey!" he said with a sheepish grin. "I noticed your sprinkler head in the front yard looks busted. Thought I'd fix it before your husband comes back. If that's okay." Claire blinked. There was no real reason to say no. But still, everything inside her screamed be careful. "Oh, thanks. I didn't even notice it was broken," she replied, leaning against the doorway. "You didn't have to." He shrugged. "Just figured I'd help." She nodded and stepped aside, letting him get to work without another word. But her eyes followed him as he crouched near the garden, setting down his tools. His movements were confident, but not showy, focused. And again, Claire felt that same frustrating awareness, not of Ethan as a boy, but as something else. Someone who saw her, not as a neighbor, not as a friend, but as a woman. About 20 minutes later, he knocked again, this time on the kitchen door. She met him there with a towel in her hand, wiping off her palms. He stood just outside, a thin sheen of sweat across his brow. "Got it working," he said. "You'll probably want to test it later." Claire nodded, smiling politely. "Thank you. That was very sweet of you." Then came the silence, heavy and sharp. Ethan didn't walk away. He didn't make an excuse to leave. He just stood there, eyes searching hers, jaw slightly clenched like he was holding back something. And then he said it. "I think about you sometimes," he blurted out. Claire froze. He looked away immediately, embarrassed, his voice quieter now. "I know I shouldn't say that. I know it's wrong. But I had to." Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't speak, couldn't. And yet, her silence said more than she meant it to. "I'm sorry," he added, backing away. "I'll go." But Claire didn't stop him. She didn't call after him, didn't slam the door. She just stood there, caught in a moment that should have been impossible, but felt terrifyingly real. And once again, a line had been drawn in the sand. One step closer than yesterday. The confession hung in the air long after Ethan had walked away. Claire remained at the kitchen door, one hand still resting on the frame, her other hand clutching the edge of the towel she'd been using minutes before. "I think about you sometimes." The words echoed louder than they were spoken. They throbbed like a pulse in her ears. She closed the door slowly and leaned her forehead against it, her eyes shut tightly. How had it come to this? She hadn't flirted. She hadn't invited it, or at least that's what she kept telling herself. But deep inside, she knew. She had allowed something unspoken to build. A look here, paused there. She had never told him to stop. And maybe that silence had spoken louder than anything else. That evening, the sun set in hues of gold and orange, casting a warm glow through the windows. Claire moved through the house in slow, distracted motions. She avoided mirrors, avoided her phone. She thought about calling her husband, but what would she even say? How's the hotel? By the way, the neighbor's son said he thinks about me. As dusk fell, Claire stepped outside to water her plants, something she rarely did herself. But she needed air, movement, anything to keep her from spiraling. The garden hose sputtered, then sprayed out in a clean arc. She turned toward the bushes, only to find Ethan standing there, on the other side of the fence. She froze. He didn't speak, just looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I was just watering," she said, her voice more fragile than she intended. She hated the way she sounded, like she was caught, even though she wasn't doing anything. Ethan stepped closer, still on his side of the fence. "I meant what I said earlier," he murmured. Claire's grip on the hose tightened. Her heart pounded. "You shouldn't," she said, though her tone lacked strength. "I know," he replied, "but I can't help it." A heavy silence fell between them. She should have walked away. She should have turned off the hose, gone back inside, shut the blinds, and ended it. But she didn't. She stayed. "I've never told anyone that before," he added. "And I don't expect anything from you. I just see you. I see the way you move, the way you laugh when you think no one's watching. You make me feel something real." Claire felt tears prick at her eyes. Not because of him, but because she missed feeling that way. Not noticed, not useful, seen. She moved toward the fence, slowly, unsure of her next step. Her fingers brushed the top of the wooden slat between them. Ethan reached his hand forward, resting his fingertips just inches from hers, not touching, waiting. And then, in one breathless moment, Claire stepped back. "We can't," she whispered. "I know," he said, without another word. She turned, walked inside, and locked the door behind her. But she didn't feel safe. Not from him, from herself. Claire lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, Ethan's words replaying in her mind like a scratched record. The room was quiet, too quiet without her husband's occasional snoring or the familiar weight of his arm draped over her waist. Her body was still, but inside her, emotions churned like a storm. She had walked away physically, but mentally, she was still standing at that fence, still feeling the pull of a moment she wasn't supposed to have. She hadn't crossed the line, but she had approached it with more curiosity than she ever imagined possible. And now, all that remained was guilt and longing. The next morning, Claire opened her journal for the first time in weeks. She had always turned to writing when things felt too large to carry. Pen in hand, she wrote, "I didn't cheat, but I thought about it. I didn't kiss him, but I let the moment stretch too far. I didn't fall in love, but I missed being seen. And maybe that's the most dangerous feeling of all." She closed the journal and sat with those words, letting their truth settle in. The events of the past 24 hours had revealed something deeper than just a fleeting attraction. They had uncovered the quiet erosion of her marriage. Not because her husband didn't love her, but because life had worn them down into something functional, not romantic. Safe but invisible. Later that afternoon, she called her husband. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" he asked, concerned. "No, not really, but I think I want to talk. When you get home." He was silent for a moment before replying, "Okay, whatever it is, we'll work through it." And just like that, Claire felt a weight lift. Not all of it, but some. She didn't tell him about Ethan, not in detail, but she told him how she had been feeling. Disconnected, unseen, quietly lonely even when they were in the same room. Her husband listened, really listened. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't offer a solution. He just stayed present. That weekend, they went for a walk. Nothing fancy, just them and the open sky. They held hands like they used to, talked about the future, laughed about something small. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. As for Ethan, he never came over again. Not alone, at least. Claire would still see him occasionally in passing, nodding politely but keeping her distance. Whatever spark had existed had been extinguished, not with bitterness but with understanding. Some connections aren't meant to last, they're meant to teach. In the end, Claire didn't walk away with a broken home or a scandalous story. She walked away with something quieter, but more valuable: clarity. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments remind us of what we're missing, and more importantly, what's still worth fighting for. White heavy check mark, the ENDS 34.